Following my previous video on Velodrome Finance, I saw several conflicted opinions in my comment section. So you have on one hand, people who see this as the result of speculation behind the Aerodrome meteoric rise. So people took profits or people started speculating on the rise of the VELO token, which indeed has risen ever since I posted this. It did touch an all-time high of 37 cents, more or less, and now it's corrected back again, and now we are back in this accumulation phase, so to speak. So small rises, and then you have a tiny correction in the follow-up. Sorry to interrupt you there, folks. I just want to quickly chime in and mention that we are currently working on a project called the Miracle. It's DeFi as a service, meaning you'll get exposed to real DeFi protocols that generate real revenue, aka real yield, and you're gonna get a cut of this without doing the setup yourself. All you have to do is enter, claim, or withdraw. Very simple. So your capital is available at all times to take, and you can choose the option where to invest. More details in the description and in our community chat. Now, on the other hand, you also have people who understand that the value of these tokens is mainly, coming from the performance of their underlying DEX. So you could argue that both sides have a point, because on one hand, of course, the DEX is what mainly drives the performance, but on the other, speculation is there because it's a big part of crypto overall. I'm not only talking about these tokens, any narrative whatsoever has speculation embedded within. And that is, highlighted, and that's visible because you're always going to have a speculative value versus the realized value. That's something you cannot escape. But today we're going to talk about what would it take for the VELO token to actually reach the levels of where the AERO token is. So we're going to look at data that basically not many people look at, or rarely people look at, or tend to overlook, all right? I just want to mention first things first that overall, if you look at the charts, you can clearly see a very high similarity, even though the AERO chart still looks, in a better shape, so to speak, than the VELO chart. And I actually didn't notice that there was a huge spike recently, but I think that got sold off overnight, because if you really look at the metrics, if you really look at the volume buys and sells and the amount of buyers versus the amount of sellers, you can see that the amount of sellers outweigh the buyers by a long margin, even though the buy volume would outweigh the sell volume. And that's very normal. You have on one hand basically 80% plus of retail who have provided liquidity are selling on a daily basis. On the other hand, you have some speculators plus some retail, but the majority are protocols that are buying up those VELO and AERO tokens in order to vest them and then basically take advantage of the bribe money that they're providing. I outlined this in my previous AERO video. You can check it out. It's on the channel and link will be in the description below. Same goes for the VELO token. So the sellers outweigh the buyers by a long margin, and this is even worse here. All right, so you have basically 90% plus of retail selling, and you have big protocols buying up those VELO tokens to stake them. And that should tell you something, right? So you have lots of big entities that are willing to put up the money at these levels to buy up those tokens in order to stake them or to vest them and take advantage of the bribe money. And if you see big players buying up, why would you sell? And for now, at least my personal strategy is that to accumulate as much as I can, and then I will assess when the time comes. I did take profits, of course, that's normal. You have to, because at the end of the day, no matter what, there's still risk. But at the end of the day as well, just to reiterate, try to take both sides. Now, let's jump into the data. So coming back here, I want to show you 3 different charts for you to understand what's going on. Now, overall, I tried to take the big metrics. I'm talking about TVL, market cap, volume growth, VVelo, VERO, participation, etc., and then I want to show you the difference here. So if you compare these two, you have Velodrome in blue, Aerodrome in red. It should be the other way around, but I got too lazy to change it up in Google Sheets. But let's just go with this. So you can clearly see on the TVL level, we're close to 730 mil. Whereas on Velodrome, that we're below 200 at 170, right? If you hover the mouse, you can clearly see 700, 174. The weekly volume, 54 versus 311. figures in market cap. Fees annualized, you have 25 versus 103. And again, this is annualized, meaning it's calculated on a weekly basis, but then it's projected to the end of the year. So these numbers tend to change. We move on to the liquidity of the net asset. So VELO versus AERO, almost 50 versus 15. The market cap, 149 versus 745.8 million. So these figures, as raw big numbers, would clearly give you a perception of how much bigger Aerodrome is than Velodrome, all right? So again, those are the most important metrics of a decentralized exchange. So you need to look at these in order to determine the optimal growth of a certain asset. Now keep in mind that something really important needs to play a part here. So on one hand, you have the underlying chain, all right? So the growth of Velodrome is capped if optimism as a chain doesn't grow that much. And on the other, you have the fact that Coinbase itself backs Aerodrome because it's on its native chain, base chain. So there are two big narratives here that are weighing, the favorable price action towards Aerodrome. If Velodrome was on base, I can guarantee you 100% that Velo would be, at this level, if not more, because it is the original MetaDex. It is the holding company, if you want to label it as such, behind Aerodrome today. Now, in absolute terms, if I show you this chart right here, you can see that if you aggregate the weight of Aerodrome versus Velodrome, you can clearly see that overall, Aerodrome outpaces Velodrome by 4 times the metrics. So TVL, almost 4. Weekly volume, 5.74. Fees annualized, 4. Native asset liquidity, 3.26. And market cap, 5. What this means is that if Velo were to reach the market cap of AERO, the price right now would be around $1.25 instead of 0.24, right? So that's a 5x increase if these two market caps were to match each other. But again, that is the simple calculation of price versus price. But at the end of the day, we need to look behind this. And when we look behind the curtain and everything else, so TVL, volume, etc., we can see that on aggregate, it's about 4 times the weight Aerodrome versus Velo. So Velo has to increase by 4 times overall. And if that were to happen, perhaps the price itself would come close to that 5 times weighting average, sorry. So you see that the market cap versus market cap figure alone gives you an idea, but then if you aggregate the other metrics and you add them together, you see that that figure makes sense, right? So it's not just speculation that is driving this, but the underlying metrics. So right now, you get an idea that, all right, okay, there is speculation, sure, but then if the figures of Velodrome were to rise in retrospect, then the price will as well. So, I could say that based on whatever we're seeing, that the weight basically is right now on the figures themselves and not on the speculation. And one last chart I want to show you right here is a percentage charts comparing the weekly volume of these two dexes and the TVL of the weight of one of these dexes versus its underlying chain. And the interesting part is that both of them capture approximately 10% of the volume of the chain. And that's super interesting. So if optimism were to match base in terms of volume, then Velodrome will capture more fees, therefore more money for VELO stakers, therefore more people will basically buy up Velo and stake it, retail, not institutions and DeFi protocols, and therefore that would boost the price of Velo. And more TVL will come because the price of Velo is boosted, meaning APR will increase, more TVL, etc., etc. So it's a nice value loop. So right now, currently, optimism is a hurdle in regards to Velodrome's growth. So if optimism as a chain grows in terms of volume and TVL, Velo will keep up. So that's the volume side. However, the TVL side is not so great because right now, Aerodrome has 46.62% of basis TVL whereas Velodrome has only 17.54%. So unfortunately, this isn't, at the level of what it should be. If these two figures were also matching, then everything would make sense. Optimism grows, Velodrome will follow instantly. However, Velodrome still has to catch up in terms of TVL. But of course, again, if more money comes to the platform, APRs will rise, therefore that TVL will increase subsequently. Now, the question is, would people come into optimism? Then optimism will grow as a result of Velodrome's growth, or vice versa, because right now Velodrome has dropped a bit. It's about 991 million in total value logs versus base at 1.4 billion. So the difference is large, but not large enough to capture the difference in TVL of Velodrome versus Optimism and TVL of Aerodrome versus base. So here is where Velodrome is lacking a bit. So of course the chain itself having more TVL coming from other sources would increase Velodrome's TVL, but even right now it could do better, 100%. So overall, those are the main things you should look at if you want to understand what's happening and if one asset could flip the other if they are in direct competition. One last thing I want to show you, another similar aspect is that overall VELO tokens existing right now are at 887.1 million with a 3.71 years average lock duration, quite similar to AERO's lock duration. So here AERO's lock duration is a bit higher, and that makes sense because remember, Velodrome started approximately 8 months before Aerodrome launched, so it does make sense, maybe a year even, that the average lock duration is lower. I expect it to be actually much lower, but clearly more people have locked their tokens recently. And of course on the supply side you have less VERO tokens because again it's 1 year, while Velodrome is 1 year behind. So the whole picture makes sense. So I just want to show you that the trust in terms of vesting tokens is there on both sides, Aerodrome versus Velodrome. We do have a Telegram group, consider joining. We do share lots of things crypto and DeFi related. You won't regret it and you will have fun. With that, see you in the next one. Have a good one.